The Zephyrian Empire stretched across 17 star systems, their crystalline ships cutting through space like silver daggers through black silk. For 3,000 years, they had expanded without resistance, absorbing weaker species into their collective consciousness or simply erasing them from existence. Their technology was beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen, their weapons capable of cracking planets in half, their shields impenetrable to all known forms of attack. Admiral Extera stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Dominion, her translucent blue skin shimmering with the neural implants that connected her directly to the ship's consciousness. Through the massive viewports, she watched her fleet of 200 vessels prepare for what would surely be another routine conquest. The target was a small, backward planet called Earth, inhabited by a primitive species that had barely learned to leave their own atmosphere. "Intelligence reports are complete, Admiral," announced her tactical officer, Lieutenant Quendal. His voice carried the usual boredom that came with analyzing inferior civilizations. "The humans possess no faster-than-light travel, no energy shields, and their most powerful weapons are crude nuclear devices. Their population is scattered across a single planet with no orbital defenses of any significance." ZYXTRA's mandibles clicked in amusement. How disappointing. I was hoping for at least a minor challenge. She turned to address the bridge crew, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never known defeat. "Signal the fleet. Standard pacification protocols. We'll be home before the next solar cycle." The Zephyrian doctrine was simple and had never failed them. Arrive in overwhelming force. Demonstrate superior firepower by destroying a few military installations. Then, demand unconditional surrender. Most species capitulated within hours. Those foolish enough to resist were systematically crushed until compliance was achieved. It was efficient, it was proven, and it had worked on every single one of the 47 species they had encountered. As the fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system, automated systems began their detailed scans. The results were exactly as expected. The humans had managed to establish a few small outposts on their moon and nearby planets, but their technology was laughably primitive. Their fastest ships would take decades to cross the distance the Zephyrian fleet had just traveled in minutes. "Admiral, we're receiving multiple communications from the planet's surface," reported Communications Officer Veltran. "They appear to be attempting to establish diplomatic contact." "Put it through," Wyxthara commanded, settling into her command throne. The main screen flickered to life, showing a middle-aged human male in what appeared to be formal attire. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp with intelligence, but Wyxthara could see the barely concealed fear beneath his diplomatic composure. "I'm Secretary General Chun of the United Nations of Earth," the human said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "We welcome you to our solar system and hope to establish peaceful relations between our peoples." ZYXTRA allowed herself a moment of genuine surprise. Most species either fled in terror or immediately surrendered when faced with the Zephyrian fleet. This human was actually attempting diplomacy. "How quaint. I am Admiral Extra of the Zephyrian Empire," she replied, activating the universal translator. "Your species will submit to imperial rule or be destroyed. You have one of your planetary rotations to decide." Secretary General Chen's expression didn't change, though Zoextra's enhanced sensors detected a slight increase in his heart rate. "We appreciate your directness, Admiral. However, we would like to propose a meeting to discuss terms. Perhaps we can find a mutually beneficial arrangement." The bridge crew erupted in chittering laughter. The audacity of this primitive creature, attempting to negotiate with the Zephyrian Empire as if it were an equal. ZYXRA raised a hand for silence, her amusement genuine. "Very well, human. Your courage in the face of certain death is amusing. You may send a single representative to my flagship. They will have one standard hour to present whatever pathetic offer your species wishes to make before we begin the pacification process." The transmission ended, and ZYXTRA turned to her staff. "Begin positioning the fleet for orbital bombardment, target their major population centers and military installations. When this diplomatic farce is over, I want to be ready to demonstrate exactly why resistance is futile. 3 hours later, a small human vessel approached the Eternal Dominion. It was a crude thing, held together with rivets and hope, moving with the graceless efficiency of species that had learned to build in space through trial and error rather than inherited knowledge. The ship was permitted to dock in one of the smaller hangars, where a full security detail waited to escort its occupant. The human who emerged was not what HFY had expected. Instead of a politician or military leader, the figure that stepped from the primitive craft was a woman of perhaps 40 Earth years, wearing simple clothing and carrying a small briefcase. Her demeanor was calm, almost serene, as she was escorted through the gleaming corridors of the Zephyrian flagship. Dr. Sarah Chun stepped into the Admiral's presence chamber with the confidence of someone who had spent years in hostile environments. As a xenobiologist and diplomat, she had been humanity's first choice for this impossible mission. Not because anyone believed she could succeed in preventing Earth's conquest, but because she was the most qualified to gather intelligence about their soon-to-be conquerors. The chamber itself was a testament to Zephyrian power and aesthetics. Crystalline formations grew from the walls like frozen lightning, each one pulsing with soft blue energy. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, creating a sense of vast space that was both beautiful and intimidating. At the center, Admiral HFY waited on a throne that seemed to be carved from a single massive gemstone. So, the Admiral said, her voice carrying harmonics that spoke of technological enhancement, the humans send a single female to negotiate for their entire species. How typically primitive. Sarah set her briefcase on the floor and opened it slowly, aware that dozens of weapons were trained on her. Admiral, I come not to negotiate our surrender, but to offer you something far more valuable than another conquered world. HFY's mandibles clicked in what Sarah was beginning to recognize as amusement. And what could a primitive species possibly offer the Zephyrian Empire? Knowledge, Sarah replied simply. Your empire has conquered 47 species across 17 star systems. You've accumulated vast territories, countless resources, and billions of subjects. But in all that time, have you encountered anything truly surprising? Anything that challenged your understanding of the universe? The Admiral leaned forward slightly, her interest piqued despite herself. Continue. Sarah reached into her briefcase and withdrew a small device, placing on the floor between them. It was clearly human in design, crude, and angular compared to the organic curves of Zephyrian technology. This is a quantum probability calculator, developed by human scientists working with principles your empire has never encountered. It can predict outcomes with accuracy rates that approach 97%. Impossible, scoffed Lieutenant Quendal from his position near the throne. No species has achieved quantum probability manipulation above 60% accuracy. Our own systems barely reach 70%. Sarah smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both humble and confident. Would you like a demonstration? For the next hour, Sarah's device correctly predicted the outcomes of increasingly complex scenarios. Random number generations, particle behaviors, even the precise timing of stellar phenomena occurring light years away. The Zephyrian officers watched in growing amazement as their own scanners confirmed each prediction. How is this possible? HFY demanded, her usual composure finally cracking. Your species lacks the mathematical foundations for such calculations. That's where you're wrong, Sarah said quietly. Humanity doesn't approach problems the way other species do. We don't follow logical progressions or inherited knowledge. We make intuitive leaps, we take impossible risks, and we find solutions that shouldn't exist. She gestured to the device. This wasn't built by following established scientific principles. It was created by a 12-year-old human child who had a dream about numbers dancing. She spent 3 years teaching herself quantum mechanics just to prove her dream was real. The bridge fell silent. In Zephyrian society, knowledge was inherited through neural implants and genetic memory. The concept of a child independently developing revolutionary technology was beyond their understanding. "You're lying," Quindal said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Admiral," Sarah continued, "your empire has conquered through superior technology and overwhelming force. But has it ever grown? Has it ever truly evolved? You absorb other species' knowledge, but you don't create new understanding. You've become perfect at being what you already are, but you've lost the ability to become something greater." Zoaxthara stood from her throne, her massive form towering over the small human. The Zephyrian way was order, predictability, the systematic application of proven methods. The idea that chaos and unpredictability could be valuable ran counter to everything their civilization stood for. "Even if what you say has merit," Zoaxthara said finally, "the Empire does not negotiate with inferior species. Our laws are absolute." "Then change the laws," Sarah said simply. The silence that followed was deafening. The very suggestion was heresy. Zephyrian law had remained unchanged for millennia, encoded in their genetic memory and reinforced by neural conditioning. The idea that it could be modified was beyond radical. It was unthinkable. "Impossible," Quendal whispered. "The laws are eternal. They cannot be changed." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Who made them eternal? Who decided they couldn't be changed?" For the first time in her long career, Admiral Zoaxthara found herself without an answer. The laws simply were. They had always been. The question of their origin or the possibility of their modification had never occurred to her. "You see," Sarah said gently, "this is what I mean. Humanity asks questions that don't have logical foundations. We challenge assumptions that have never been challenged. We look for answers in places no one has ever thought to look." She reached into her briefcase again and withdrew a small datapad. "This contains the complete works of human philosophy, science, art, and literature. Thousands of years of species learning to think in ways that should be impossible." The datapad seemed insignificant, a simple device that could easily fit in one's palm. Yet as Zoaxthara looked at it, she felt something she had never experienced before. Curiosity about the unknown rather than the desire to control it. "What do you propose?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "A partnership," Sarah replied. "Not conquest, not surrender, but genuine cooperation. Humanity offers our unique perspectives, our unpredictable innovations, our ability to find solutions where none should exist. In exchange, the Zephyrian Empire shares its vast knowledge and resources, helping us grow and learn. And if humanity proves to be disappointing?" Sarah's smile returned, brighter than before. "Admiral, I guarantee you that humanity will disappoint you. We'll fail in ways you can't imagine, succeed in impossible circumstances, and constantly surprise you with both our brilliance and our stupidity. The question is, would you rather have a galaxy full of predictable subjects or partners who can show you wonders you've never dreamed of?" The Admiral reached for the datapad, her crystalline fingers hesitating just inches from its surface. In that moment, she stood at a crossroads that would define not just humanity's fate, but the future of the Zephyrian Empire itself. The bridge crew watched in stunned silence as their admiral, who had never shown uncertainty in 3 centuries of service, struggled with a decision that challenged the very foundations of their existence. The small human stood calmly, waiting as if she had all the time in the universe. Finally, Zoaxthara picked up the datapad. The moment her fingers made contact with its surface, data began flowing into her neural implants. Poetry, mathematics, philosophy, music, science, art, a chaotic flood of human thought and creativity that defied every organizational system her mind tried to impose upon it. And, for the first time in her long life, Admiral Zoaxthara laughed with genuine delight at encountering something she couldn't understand. "Dr. Chun," she said, using Sarah's title for the first time, "you have given me much to consider. I will present your proposal to the Imperial Council. And the fleet? Sarah asked quietly. Will remain in position while we deliberate. You have bought your species time, human. Use it wisely. As Sarah was escorted back to her ship, word of the unprecedented meeting spread through the Zephyrian fleet. For the first time in their recorded history, a conquest had been delayed not by resistance, but by curiosity. The implications rippled through their rigid command structure like cracks in crystal. On Earth below, humanity held its collective breath as news of the meeting spread. Some called it a victory, others a temporary reprieve. But in the depths of research laboratories and universities around the world, a different kind of activity began. Scientists, artists, philosophers, and dreamers started working with desperate creativity, knowing that they might have only days to prove that humanity deserved to exist. They had no idea that in the vast chambers of the Zephyrian flagship, their simple datapad was causing the greatest crisis of faith the Empire had experienced in 3 millennia. Admiral Vexthera found herself reading human poetry at odd hours, trying to understand why words arranged in seemingly random patterns could evoke emotions she didn't know she possessed. The Empire's perfect order was beginning to crack, and through those cracks, something unprecedented was starting to grow. Doubt, wonder, and the terrifying possibility that they might not know everything after all. In her private chambers, Admiral Vexthera stared at the datapad that had turned her world upside down. The human writings were chaotic, contradictory, and utterly fascinating. They spoke of love and loss, of triumph and failure, of questions that had no answers and answers that led to more questions. One piece particularly captured her attention, a short poem by an ancient human named Rumi, Sell Your Cleverness, and by Bewilderment. Cleverness is mere opinion. Bewilderment is intuition. The concept was alien to everything the Zephyrian Empire stood for, yet it resonated with something deep within her consciousness. For 3,000 years, they had sold bewilderment and bought cleverness. They had answers for everything, solutions to every problem, responses to every situation. But when had they last felt wonder? As she contemplated this question, her communication systems chimed with an urgent message from the Imperial Council. The deliberation she had requested was being granted, but with a condition. She would need to present her case before the full assembly of Imperial commanders. It was a daunting prospect. The Imperial Council consisted of the 50 most powerful military leaders in Zephyrian space, beings who had conquered entire star systems and crushed countless rebellions. They were not known for their flexibility or openness to new ideas. Yet, as Vexthera prepared her presentation, she found herself oddly excited by the challenge. It had been centuries since she had faced a truly uncertain outcome, and the feeling was both terrifying and exhilarating. On Earth, humanity prepared for what might be its final days. But instead of panic, there was a strange sense of purpose. Artists worked feverishly to capture the essence of human creativity. Scientists pushed the boundaries of their understanding. Children asked questions that made their teachers think in new ways. In the end, both species stood at the precipice of change, neither fully understanding what lay ahead, but both sensing that the universe was about to become a very different place. The Zephyrian Empire had always prided itself on certainty. In the space of a single conversation, humanity had introduced them to something far more powerful, possibility. And in the vast darkness between stars, that possibility began to shine like a new sun, promising either the birth of something magnificent or the destruction of everything both species held dear. The only certainty was that nothing would ever be the same again. Admiral Vexthera closed her eyes and felt something she had never experienced before, anticipation for an unknown future. Whether it would be wonderful or terrible remained to be seen, but for the first time in her life, she was genuinely curious to find out. The small blue world below continued its ancient rotation, unaware that its fate had become intertwined with forces beyond its comprehension. But somewhere in the depths of human consciousness, a collective dream was taking shape, a vision of a universe where different ways of thinking could coexist and create something neither species could achieve alone. The Zephyrian Empire had considered themselves invincible for 3,000 years. In the space of a few hours, humans had introduced them to a concept that would change everything: the invincibility of an open mind. The real test was yet to come. The Imperial Council Chamber was a monument to Zephyrian supremacy. Carved from a single asteroid and positioned at the gravitational center of their home system, it floated in perfect balance, its crystalline walls reflecting the light of 3 suns. 50 command thrones arranged in concentric circles around a central platform where Admiral HFY now stood, holding the small human data pad that had started everything. The assembled commanders represented the pinnacle of Zephyrian military might. Each had conquered multiple star systems. Each commanded fleets that could reduce planets to cosmic dust. Their collective experience spanned millennia, their victories numbered in the thousands. They were beings of absolute certainty, unaccustomed to doubt or debate. High Commander Vextar, the most senior among them, spoke first. His voice carried the weight of ages and the authority of someone who had never been wrong. Admiral Zayexthara, your request for this assembly is unprecedented. You claim that a primitive species has something to offer the Empire. Explain this impossibility. Zayexthara felt the weight of their collective gaze, but also something else, the strange exhilaration she had discovered while reading human philosophy. Commanders, what I am about to share will challenge our most fundamental beliefs. I ask that you listen with the same openness that has made us masters of the galaxy. Our mastery comes from strength, not openness, Commander Keldor interrupted, his mandibles clicking with irritation. We have conquered 47 species without compromise or collaboration. Why should the 48th be different? Instead of answering directly, ZYXRA activated the holographic display system. The chamber filled with images from the human data pad, paintings that seemed to move with emotional energy, mathematical equations that spiraled into impossible fractals, music that somehow translated into visual patterns of stunning beauty. Because, she said quietly, in 3,000 years of conquest, have we ever encountered anything that made us question who we are? The silence that followed was profound. The assembled commanders were beings who had never questioned their nature or purpose. They were Zephyrian. They conquered. The universe submitted. These were the fundamental truths upon which their existence was built. Commander Zelena, one of the younger members of the council, leaned forward in her throne. These images are unusual, but surely you don't suggest that aesthetic curiosities justify abandoning our proven methods? Zoixthara smiled, an expression that seemed strange in the solemn chamber. 3 days ago, I would have agreed with you completely. Then, I encountered this. The holographic display shifted to show Sarah Chen's quantum probability device alongside detailed scans of its construction. Technical specifications floated in the air, each one highlighting aspects of human technology that should have been impossible. This device achieves 97% accuracy in quantum probability calculations, ZYXThara announced. Our best systems achieve 70%. According to every model we possess, such accuracy should be mathematically impossible without computational resources equivalent to a star-sized brain. High Commander Vextar rose from his throne, his massive form moving with the fluid grace of a predator. Impossible. Show us the construction principles. That's the remarkable part, ZYXRA replied. There are no construction principles. No logical progression from known science to final product. The device was created by a human child who claimed to have dreamed the solution. The chamber erupted in harsh chittering as commanders voiced their disbelief. The concept violated everything they understood about technological development. Innovation followed logical paths, built upon previous knowledge through systematic research and development. The idea that breakthrough technology could emerge from dreams was beyond their comprehension. Dreams, Commander Keldor spat. Primitive nonsense. Surely this is some form of deception. I conducted the tests myself, the HFY replied calmly. The device works exactly as claimed. But that's not the most significant discovery. She gestured, and the display shifted again, showing complex psychological profiles and behavioral analyses. I've spent the past 3 days studying human culture, philosophy, and history. Well, I found challenges our most basic assumptions about intelligence and progress. The display filled with examples. Human art that broke every rule of aesthetic proportion, yet somehow achieved perfect beauty. Scientific discoveries made by individuals with no formal training, solutions to engineering problems that violated standard practice yet worked flawlessly. Humans don't follow logical development patterns, HFY explained. They make intuitive leaps across gaps in knowledge. They find solutions by thinking in ways that shouldn't work. They innovate through chaos rather than order. Commander Zelena studied the data with growing fascination. These patterns are anarchic. How does their civilization function without systematic knowledge frameworks? That's exactly the point, HFY said, her excitement becoming contagious despite the formal setting. Their civilization shouldn't function according to our models, yet not only survives, but produces innovations at an exponential rate. In the past century alone, they've advanced from primitive flight to orbital habitats, from mechanical calculation to quantum computing, from chemical energy to fusion reactors. High Commander Vextar descended from his elevated position, approaching the central platform where HFY stood. Even if we accept your analysis, what relevance does this have to the Empire? We are not lacking in technological advancement, aren't we? HFY challenged, her voice carrying a note of revolutionary fervor. When was the last time we made a genuine breakthrough? When did we last encounter a problem we couldn't solve with existing methods? When did we last feel surprise at discovering something new? The questions hung in the crystalline air like accusations. The assembled commanders were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Their technological progress had been largely incremental for centuries. They absorbed and refined the innovations of conquered species, but original breakthroughs were increasingly rare. Our methods are proven, Commander Keldor insisted, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Our methods are perfect for being what we already are, HFY agreed. But they may be preventing us from becoming something greater. She activated a new section of the display, showing projections based on human innovation patterns. If these calculations are correct, collaboration with humanity could advance our understanding of quantum mechanics by centuries within a single generation. Their unpredictable thinking could solve problems we don't even know we have. Commander Zelena stood, her own excitement beginning to mirror HFY's. The fusion of systematic knowledge with chaotic innovation. It's theoretically fascinating. It's practically dangerous, High Commander Vextar countered. Our civilization is based on order, hierarchy, and proven methods. Introducing chaos could destroy everything we've built. Or, HFY said softly, it could help us build something we never imagined possible. The debate continued for hours, but slowly the tide began to turn. Younger commanders found themselves intrigued by the possibilities, while older ones struggled with the implications. The chamber that had begun in unanimous skepticism was gradually filled with uncertainty, curiosity, and something even more dangerous, hope. Finally, High Commander Vextar called for order. Admiral HFY, your presentation has been illuminating, but you ask us to abandon 3 millennia of successful policy based on the whims of a single primitive species. I ask you to consider expansion rather than abandonment, HFY replied. Keep our proven methods for situations where they work, but add new tools for problems that require new thinking. And if the humans prove disappointing, if their supposed innovations fail to materialize, HFY's mandibles clicked in what her colleagues were learning to recognize as amusement. Then we will have lost nothing but time and gained invaluable data about the limitations of chaotic thinking. But if they succeed, She let the implication hang in the air. If humanity lived up to its promise, the Zephyrian Empire could evolve beyond its current limitations, could become something unprecedented in galactic history, a civilization that grew through diversity rather than conquest. There is another consideration, Commander Zelena added. The humans achieved their quantum breakthrough without our knowledge base or resources. Imagine what they might accomplish with access to Imperial technology and information. The thought sent ripples of excitement through the chamber. Beings who had grown accustomed to predictable outcomes suddenly found themselves contemplating infinite possibilities. Very well, High Commander Vextar announced after a long deliberation. The Council will vote on Admiral Zewixtara's proposal, but understand that this decision will echo through Imperial history for millennia to come. The voting process was ancient and ritualistic. Each commander would place their crystalline seal into one of two receptacles, conquest or collaboration. The decision required a simple majority, but its implementation would require unanimous commitment. One by one, the seals clinked into the receptacles. The sound echoed through the chamber like a countdown to destiny. When the final vote was cast, the chamber fell silent as automated systems tallied the results. 26 votes for collaboration, the system announced in its emotionless tone. 24 votes for traditional conquest. The margin was slim, but the decision was final. For the first time in their recorded history, the Zephyrian Empire would attempt partnership rather than domination. High Commander Vextar stood, his expression unreadable. Admiral Zewixtara, you have achieved something remarkable. You have convinced the Imperial Council to gamble with the future of our civilization. I hope you understand the magnitude of what you have initiated. I do, Zewixtara replied solemnly, and I accept full responsibility for the consequences. Then, return to Earth, Vextar commanded. Begin this experiment in controlled chaos. But remember, the Empire's patience is not infinite. Humanity has one standard year to prove their worth. Failure will result in standard pacification protocols. As the council session ended and commanders began departing for their respective fleets, Zewixtara felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders. She had bought humanity a chance, but that chance came with enormous risks for both species. Meanwhile, on Earth, Sarah Chun stood in the United Nations Assembly, delivering her report to representatives from every nation on the planet. The room was filled with tension, hope, and barely controlled panic as she described her encounter with the Zephyrian Admiral. They've given us 1 year, she concluded. 1 year to prove that human creativity and innovation can be valuable to an empire that has conquered half the galaxy. 1 year to show that we're worth more alive than dead. The questions came rapidly. What do the aliens want? What could humanity possibly offer beings with such advanced technology? How could they compete with civilizations that had developed over millennia? Sarah's answer was simple but profound. We don't compete with them. We complement them. We show them things they've never seen before, help them ask questions they've never considered, find solutions to problems they didn't know existed. In research facilities around the world, the greatest minds of humanity began collaborating on an unprecedented scale. Artists worked alongside quantum physicists, children's drawings inspired engineering breakthroughs, and poets found themselves contributing to mathematical theorems. The old barriers between disciplines began dissolving as humanity prepared to prove that chaos and creativity were not weaknesses to be eliminated, but strengths to be celebrated. Back in space, Admiral Zewixtara prepared her fleet for something it had never done before. Peaceful first contact with the intention of mutual benefit rather than conquest. The protocols didn't exist, the procedures were being invented in real time, and the outcome was completely uncertain. For a species that had thrived on certainty for 3,000 years, it was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. As the Zephyrian fleet adjusted its formation from attack configuration to diplomatic arrangement, Both species stood on the threshold of an experiment that would either revolutionize galactic civilization or destroy everything they had worked to achieve. The countdown had begun. 1 year to prove that the impossible could become inevitable, that invincibility could be surpassed by adaptability, and that the greatest victories might come not from conquest, but from collaboration. Admiral Alpha looked at the small blue world below and whispered a phrase she had learned from human literature, into the unknown. For the first time in her long life, she had no idea what would happen next. And she had never been more excited to find out 6 months into the year of probation. The makeshift research station orbiting Earth had become something neither species had anticipated. What began as a sterile meeting facility had evolved into a chaotic laboratory where Zephyrian precision met human creativity in ways that defied all predictions. Dr. Sarah Chan floated through the central corridor, still marveling at how the station's architecture had changed. The original rigid, geometric designs had been gradually modified by human suggestions and Zephyrian implementations, creating flowing spaces that somehow felt both alien and familiar. Crystalline growth patterns from Zephyrian technology intertwined with human artistic sensibilities, producing structures that were beautiful in ways neither species had achieved alone. In Lab Section Alpha, she found Admiral Extra hunched over a workstation alongside Dr. Marcus Webb, a 12-year-old prodigy who had been recruited after his quantum probability breakthrough. The sight still amazed Sarah, the towering alien admiral, her crystalline implants flickering with rapid calculations, working intently beside a human child who was sketching diagrams that looked more like abstract art than scientific notation. The harmonic resonance patterns are definitely there, Marcus was saying, his young voice filled with excitement. But they're not following the wave equations we expected. Look at this. He held up his sketch, a swirling pattern that seemed to dance on the page. To human eyes, it might have been a child's drawing of a hurricane. To Zuexthara's enhanced perception, it was a revolutionary breakthrough in faster-than-light communication theory. Impossible, the Admiral murmured, but her tone held wonder rather than dismissal. According to all known physics, quantum entanglement cannot maintain coherence across interstellar distances. Yet your pattern suggests that we've been thinking about it wrong. Marcus finished happily. Maybe quantum particles don't get entangled. Maybe they get lonely, and loneliness works differently than we thought. Sarah watched Extra process this statement, saw the exact moment when the alien's rigid scientific framework tried to categorize loneliness as a physical force and failed completely. Instead of rejecting the concept, however, the Admiral leaned forward with increased interest. "Explain this loneliness principle," she requested. Marcus began drawing again, his pencil moving in impossible curves that somehow made perfect sense. Well, if you've ever been really lonely, you know it makes you do things you normally wouldn't do. You reach out further, try harder to connect, sometimes break rules you usually follow. As he spoke, his sketch evolved into a complex diagram showing quantum particles extending their influence beyond normal limits when isolated from their entangled partners. The mathematics underlying his childish explanation were breathtaking in their elegance. The emotional anthropomorphization of quantum mechanics, ZYXTRA whispered. It shouldn't work, but the mathematical models are perfect. In Lab Section Beta, a different kind of breakthrough was occurring. Dr. Emily Rodriguez, a biotechnician, was collaborating with Zephyrian medical specialist Cordell on what had started as a routine analysis of human cellular structure. What they had discovered was challenging everything both species knew about biological adaptation. The redundancy patterns are fascinating, Cordell was explaining to Admiral Wyexthara during her daily rounds. Zephyrian physiology is optimized for efficiency. Each biological system serves a specific function with minimal overlap. But humans are ridiculously over-engineered, Dr. Rodriguez added with a grin. We have backup systems for our backup systems. Brain hemispheres that can compensate for each other, organs that can function at partial capacity, genetic sequences that activate under stress to provide capabilities we don't normally use. It's evolutionary chaos, Cordell agreed, but his tone held admiration rather than criticism. Inefficient, wasteful, and absolutely brilliant. When faced with environmental pressures, humans don't just adapt. They develop entirely new capabilities. ZYXTRA studied the biological scans floating in holographic detail around them. And you believe this biological redundancy influences their cognitive patterns? We think it's the source of their innovative capabilities, Rodriguez explained. When humans encounter problems they can't solve with their primary cognitive systems, backup neural pathways activate. They start thinking in ways that bypass logical limitations. Dreams, inspiration, intuition, Cordell added. All manifestations of biological backup systems designed for survival under impossible circumstances. The implications were staggering. Zephyrian evolution had pursued perfection through efficiency, eliminating redundancy, and optimizing each biological system. Humans had evolved through chaos, developing multiple overlapping systems that created cognitive flexibility rather than efficiency. In Lab Section Gamma, perhaps the most extraordinary collaboration was taking place. Commander Keldor, one of the most skeptical voices from the Imperial Council, was working with Dr. Janet Kim, a specialist in human cultural anthropology. Their project had begun as an analysis of human social structures and had evolved into something unprecedented, a study of how chaos could create stability. Your military hierarchies are completely illogical, Keldor was saying, but his tone held fascination rather than criticism. Command structures that allow subordinates to question orders, decision-making processes that incorporate dissenting opinions, strategic planning that deliberately includes unpredictable elements. Dr. Kim nodded, pulling up historical examples on the lab's display systems. Military historians call it organized chaos, the ability to maintain unit cohesion while adapting to unexpected circumstances. It shouldn't work according to traditional command theory, but it's proven remarkably effective. The Battle of Stalingrad, Keldor mused, studying tactical displays from World War II. Standard military doctrine would have demanded either full advance or complete retreat. Instead, humans chose a hybrid approach that defied all logical analysis, and won through sheer bloody-minded refusal to follow rational decision-making, Kim added cheerfully. Sometimes the best strategy is to be so unpredictable that even you don't know what you're going to do next. Keldor's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign that his neural implants were processing information at maximum capacity. This explains their success against overwhelming odds throughout history. They don't just fight wars, they redefine what warfare means. These discoveries were being replicated throughout the station. In every lab, every meeting room, every casual interaction between species, the same pattern emerged. Human chaos, complementing Zephyrian order in ways that created possibilities neither had imagined alone. The breakthrough that would change everything came from an unexpected source. 8-year-old Amy Patterson had been visiting the station with her mother, a logistics coordinator. While the adults worked on supply management, Amy had wandered into an engineering section where Zephyrian technicians were struggling with a fundamental problem in their faster-than-light drive systems. The drives worked by creating controlled tiers in space-time, allowing ships to step outside normal physics and emerge elsewhere in the galaxy. The process required enormous energy expenditure and could only be sustained for short periods. The Zephyrians had accepted these limitations as fundamental constants of the universe. Amy, who had been watching the technicians work, raised her small hand and asked a question that would echo through galactic history. Why don't you ask space-time if it wants to be torn? Senior Technician Morgan looked down at the human child with barely concealed irritation. Space-time is not a conscious entity. It cannot want or not want anything. How do you know? Amy asked with the innocent persistence that only children possess. Did you ever try asking? The question was absurd. Space-time was a mathematical construct, a framework for understanding physical reality. It had no consciousness, no will, no capacity for desire or preference. Every Zephyrian knew this as fundamental fact. But Amy's question planted a seed of doubt that began growing in unexpected directions. What if they were approaching space-time manipulation with the wrong assumptions? What if brute force wasn't the only option? Dr. Sarah Chun, who had been nearby during this exchange, recognized the spark of something revolutionary. She contacted Marcus Webb, whose quantum loneliness theory had already begun reshaping their understanding of particle behavior. What if space-time has preferences we've never considered? She asked him. What if instead of forcing tears in reality, we could find natural weak points? Marcus's eyes lit up with the kind of excitement that had made him legendary among human physicists. Like finding where reality wants to bend instead of making it bend where we want. Within hours, a new research team had formed around Amy's innocent question. Human physicists worked alongside Zephyrian engineers, approaching faster-than-light travel from angles that neither species had considered alone. Instead of forcing space-time to accommodate their needs, they began looking for ways to work with the natural structure of reality. The mathematics were unlike anything in existing literature. Human intuition guided the initial concepts, while Zephyrian precision refined the calculations. The result was a theoretical framework that suggested faster-than-light travel could be achieved with a fraction of the energy previously required, simply by finding the right approach. Admiral Vexthera stood in the station's central observation deck, looking down at Earth while processing reports from every research section. The year that had begun with skepticism and resignation was ending with discoveries that challenged the foundations of galactic science. Dr. Sarah Chun joined her at the viewport, both women contemplating the small blue world that had become the center of an unimaginable revolution. My people are changing, Vexthera said quietly. Not just learning new things, but thinking in new ways. Commander Keldor requested permission to study human poetry. Technician Morgan has begun incorporating what she calls intuitive engineering into her designs. Even High Commander Vextar has been reading your philosophers. Sarah smiled. And my people are changing too. We've learned to ask different questions, to think beyond our usual limitations. The collaboration isn't just producing new science. It's creating new kinds of minds. The Imperial Council will want results, Zexthera warned. Concrete achievements, practical applications. They won't be satisfied with theoretical breakthroughs alone. Then, let's give them something concrete, Sarah replied. Amy's faster-than-light theory, Marcus's quantum communication system, the biological adaptation research. We have the tools to revolutionize galactic civilization. As if summoned by their conversation, a priority communication arrived from the Imperial Council. High Commander Vextar's image materialized in the observation deck, his expression unreadable. Admiral Zexthera, the evaluation period nears its end. The Council requires a comprehensive report on the human collaboration experiment. Have they proven their worth to the Empire? Vexthera looked at Sarah, then at the Earth below, then at the research station that had become something neither species could have built alone. High Commander, they have proven something far more valuable than worth. They have proven that we still have the capacity to become more than we are. The silence that followed was pregnant with possibility. In laboratories throughout the station, humans and Zephyrians continued their impossible work, unaware that the future of galactic civilization hung in the balance of their admiral's words. Explain, Vextar commanded, his tone carrying the weight of imperial authority. We thought we were testing humanity, Zexthera replied. Instead, we discovered we were testing ourselves. The question isn't whether humans deserve to survive. The question is whether we deserve to evolve. The communication ended abruptly, leaving Sarah and Vexthera alone with their thoughts and the vast implications of what they had unleashed. In 1 month, the Imperial Council would make its final decision. But, regardless of that decision, both species had already been fundamentally changed by their encounter with the impossible. In the depths of space, the Zephyrian fleet maintained its vigilant watch over Earth, no longer as conquerors but as guardians of an experiment that had grown beyond anyone's control. The small blue world below continued its ancient rotation, unaware that its fate would soon determine the future of intelligence itself in the galaxy. The year of probation was ending, but the age of possibility was just beginning. The Imperial Council chamber had been transformed. Where once rigid crystalline formations had created an atmosphere of absolute order, now flowing patterns wound through the walls like frozen music. The change was subtle but profound, representing the fundamental shift that had begun with a single human question and now threatened to reshape the Empire itself. High Commander Vextar stood at the central podium, his massive form somehow diminished by the uncertainty that had crept into Imperial thinking over the past year. Around him, the 50 commanders who comprised the council sat in their ancient thrones, but their positions of absolute authority felt less certain than they had 12 months ago. Admiral Vextar entered the chamber, carrying 3 objects that would determine the fate of 2 civilizations. Amy Patterson's theoretical framework for consciousness-assisted faster-than-light travel, Marcus Webb's functioning quantum communication device, and a simple datapad containing collaborative research that challenged everything the Empire thought it knew about the nature of intelligence. Commanders, Vextar began, his voice carrying undertones that betrayed his own internal conflict. We gather to evaluate an experiment that has exceeded our expectations in unexpected ways. Admiral Zyxthara, present your findings. Zyxthara activated the chamber's holographic systems, filling the vast space with displays that would have been impossible to create without the fusion of human creativity and Zephyrian technology. The presentations weren't just data. They were art, mathematical poetry that told the story of 2 species learning to think together. 1 year ago, I stood before this council and argued that humanity offered something we had never encountered, the ability to surprise ourselves. Today, I report that the surprise has become a revolution. The first display showed Amy Patterson's breakthrough in faster-than-light physics. The 8-year-old human's question about asking spacetime's permission had led to a complete reconceptualization of interstellar travel. Instead of brute force tears in reality, the new approach identified natural weak points in spacetime structure, reducing energy requirements by 95% while increasing travel speeds by orders of magnitude. Impossible, Commander Keldor whispered, but his tone held wonder rather than disbelief. His own work with human military strategists had taught him to expect the impossible from human thinking. The mathematics are verified, Zyxthara replied. We have constructed a prototype drive based on the child's theoretical framework. Initial tests suggest we may be able to traverse the galaxy in days rather than months. The implications rippled through the chamber like shock waves. The Zephyrian Empire's power had always been based partly on their superior faster-than-light technology. If Amy's theories were correct, they had just become exponentially more powerful, but through collaboration rather than conquest. The second display focused on Marcus Webb's quantum communication breakthrough. His loneliness principle had solved the problem of maintaining entanglement across interstellar distances by treating quantum particles as entities capable of emotional states rather than purely mathematical constructs. Real-time communication across galactic distances, Zyxthara announced. No lag, no degradation, perfect clarity. The human child's anthropomorphization of quantum mechanics has created technology that approaches telepathy in its effectiveness. Commander Zelana rose from her throne, her excitement visible in the rapid flickering of her neural implants. The strategic applications alone would revolutionize Imperial coordination. Instant communication between fleets, real-time intelligence from any corner of our territory. But that's not the most significant discovery, Zyxthara continued, shifting to the third display. This one showed collaborative project from every section of the research station, a cascade of breakthroughs that had emerged from the fusion of human chaos and Zephyrian order. Medical research that had solved diseases both species thought incurable. engineering projects that created materials stronger than anything previously imagined, agricultural techniques that could turn barren worlds into gardens, weapons technology so advanced it made their current armaments look like primitive clubs. In every field we investigated together, the results exceeded what either species could achieve alone, the Wijkstera reported. But more importantly, we discovered that intelligence itself is more diverse and powerful than we ever imagined. High Commander Vextar descended from his elevated position, approaching the central display where holographic representations of human and Zephyrian thought patterns intertwined in complex dances of logic and intuition. These achievements are remarkable, he admitted, his voice carefully controlled. But they raise troubling questions. If human chaos can enhance our order, what does this mean for the stability of the Empire? What happens when unpredictability becomes a governing principle? The question hung in the crystalline air like a challenge to everything the Empire represented. For 3,000 years, stability had been their greatest strength. Predictable hierarchy, proven methods, absolute order. Now, they faced the possibility that their greatest strength might also be their greatest limitation. With respect, High Commander, a new voice interrupted, perhaps the question is not whether we can control the change, but whether we can survive without it. Every head turned toward the speaker. Commander Cordell, one of the most conservative members of the council, stood beside his throne with an expression that suggested he was as surprised by his own words as everyone else. Explain, Vextar commanded, though his tone suggested he already suspected what his subordinate would say. I have spent the past month analyzing the long-term trajectory of the Empire, Cordell continued, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. Our expansion rate has been declining for the past 5 centuries. The species we encounter are increasingly either too primitive to offer meaningful resources or too advanced to conquer easily. We have been succeeding through repetition of past achievements rather than creation of new possibilities. The admission was shocking in its honesty. The Empire's eternal expansion had been accepted as natural law, but Cordell's analysis suggested they were approaching fundamental limits. We are becoming victims of our own perfection, he concluded. Too ordered to adapt, too certain to learn, too powerful to recognize when power alone is insufficient. Admiral Wijkstera watched the council absorb this revelation, seeing the exact moment when their collective certainty began to crack. For beings who had never questioned their own supremacy, the suggestion that they might be stagnating was almost incomprehensible. The humans offer us evolution, she said quietly. Not just new technology, but new ways of thinking about technology. Not just new strategies, but new ways of thinking about strategy. Not just new knowledge, but new ways of thinking about knowledge itself. She gestured to the holographic displays surrounding them. Every breakthrough we achieved this year came from combining our methodical approach with their intuitive leaps. Neither species alone could have reached these conclusions. And if we reject this collaboration? Commander Zelana asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Then, we continue as we have, Wijkstera replied. Powerful, stable, and slowly growing obsolete as the universe evolves around us. The silence that followed was profound. 50 commanders, each representing millennia of military and political experience, confronted a choice that would define not just their empire's future, but the future of intelligence in the galaxy. High Commander Vextar returned to his throne, his movements slower than usual as he processed implications that challenge his most fundamental beliefs. Admiral Vextera, your report suggests that humanity has proven not just their worth, but their necessity. That the Empire needs them more than they need us. No, Wijkstera corrected gently. We need each other. The research station has shown that neither species can achieve these breakthroughs alone. Human creativity without Zephyrian structure produces chaos. Zephyrian structure without human creativity produces stagnation. Together, we create something unprecedented, directed innovation. She activated a final display, showing projections based on continued collaboration, technology that could reshape matter at the atomic level, space-time manipulation that could create pocket universes, communication systems that transcended the boundaries between individual minds. This is what we could become together, she said. Not conquerors or subjects, but partners in evolution itself. The vote, when it came, was not the simple choice between conquest and collaboration that had faced them a year earlier. This time, they voted on the future of consciousness itself, on whether intelligence should remain locked in the patterns of the past or evolve toward possibilities they could barely imagine. The crystalline seals clinked into receptacles with sounds that echoed through galactic history. When the counting was complete, the result was overwhelming. 47 votes for partnership, 3 for traditional conquest. The decision is made, High Commander Vextar announced, his voice carrying a mixture of excitement and terror. The Empire will enter into formal alliance with humanity. We will share our knowledge, our resources, and our future. As the council session ended and commanders departed to spread the news throughout the Empire, Admiral Vextar felt the weight of transformation settling over everything she had ever known. The Zephyrian Empire was dead. In its place, something unprecedented was being born. On Earth, the news arrived through Marcus Webb's quantum communication system, reaching every major city simultaneously in a cascade of languages and celebrations. Humanity had not just survived first contact with a galactic empire. They had transformed it into something neither species could have achieved alone. But even as celebrations erupted across Earth's surface, deeper changes were already beginning. In research facilities on both worlds, new collaborations were forming. Artists worked with engineers. Children asked questions that challenged ancient assumptions, and the boundaries between disciplines began dissolving in favor of integrated thinking. The transformation was not just political or technological, it was cognitive. Both species were beginning to think in ways that transcended their evolutionary limitations, developing hybrid approaches to problems that neither pure logic nor pure intuition could solve alone. In the depths of space, the fleets that had once been instruments of conquest began converting to exploration vessels and mobile research platforms. The Empire's vast military machine was being repurposed for discovery rather than dominance, seeking new forms of intelligence to collaborate with rather than civilizations to conquer. Admiral Vextar stood once again in the observation deck of the research station, but now she was joined by colleagues from both species. Dr. Sarah Chun continued her diplomatic work, but now as an architect of interspecies collaboration rather than humanity's desperate advocate. Marcus Webb had become the youngest department head in galactic history, leading research into quantum consciousness theory. Amy Patterson was designing educational programs that would teach children of both species to think in the hybrid patterns that were becoming the new standard for advanced problem solving. What have we begun? The Vextar asked, watching as Earth and the Zephyrian fleet moved in the complex orbital patterns that had become their new normal. Something unprecedented, Sarah replied. Something impossible. Something that will either be the greatest achievement in galactic history or the most spectacular failure. And which do you think it will be? Sarah smiled, the expression carrying the chaotic confidence that had started everything. Both, simultaneously. That's what makes a human. As if to prove her point, alarms began sounding throughout the station. But instead of indicating danger, they announced something far more extraordinary. First contact with a third species, one whose approach to consciousness differed from both human and Zephyrian models. The Alliance was about to face its first real test, not against the known challenges of conquest or collaboration, but against the infinite possibilities of a universe that contained forms of intelligence beyond their current imagination. The small blue world that had started everything continued its ancient rotation, now the center of an expanding network of minds that were learning to think together in ways that transcended the limitations of individual species. The Zephyrian Empire had considered themselves invincible for 3,000 years. Humanity had proven them wrong by showing them something better than invincibility, the power to grow beyond what they had ever thought possible. The greatest adventure in galactic history was just beginning 5 years after the first contact that had transformed two civilizations. The galaxy had become something unrecognizable. What began as a desperate human gambit to avoid extinction had evolved into the greatest revolution in consciousness the universe had ever witnessed. The research station orbiting Earth had grown into a sprawling city in space, its architecture a flowing fusion of human creativity and Zephyrian engineering that seemed to reshape itself daily. Ships from dozens of species docked at its ports, each bringing new perspectives to add to the ever-expanding collaboration that had begun with a single question about whether space-time wanted to be torn. Dr. Sarah Chun, now bearing the title of First Speaker for Interspecies Cognitive Development, stood in the Grand Assembly Chamber addressing representatives from 43 different forms of intelligence. The chamber itself was a marvel of adaptive architecture, capable of adjusting its environment to accommodate beings of crystalline thought, gaseous consciousness, and everything in between. 5 years ago, she began, her words translated simultaneously into dozens of languages, electromagnetic patterns, and sensory experiences. The Zephyrian Empire encountered humanity and discovered that conquest was not the only path to growth. Today, we celebrate something far more extraordinary: the emergence of truly galactic intelligence. The assembly erupted in a symphony of approval that transcended sound. Crystalline beings chimed in harmonious frequencies. Energy creatures pulsed with synchronized light, and the human representatives simply cheered with the chaotic enthusiasm that had become their trademark throughout the galaxy. Admiral Xara, now Director of Integrated Research for the Galactic Collaboration Initiative, activated the chamber's holographic systems to display the magnificent scope of what they had achieved together. The display showed not just star maps or technological advances, but something unprecedented, a visualization of intelligence itself as it had evolved through their partnership. What they saw was breathtaking. Thought patterns that began as purely human or Zephyrian had evolved into hybrid forms that transcended both origins. But, more importantly, the integration had continued as new species joined the collaboration, each adding their unique cognitive signatures to the growing symphony of galactic consciousness. The Veltar had contributed their ability to perceive time in nonlinear patterns, allowing the collaboration to solve problems by thinking backward from solutions. The Mordun had shared their capacity for parallel consciousness, enabling simultaneous exploration of multiple research directions. The Quinera had provided their talent for emotional mathematics, where feelings became calculable forces that could be applied to physical problems. Each species we've encountered has proven the same fundamental truth, ZYXDRA announced to the assembly. Intelligence is not a single phenomenon, but an infinite spectrum of possibilities. Consciousness itself is not limited by biology, technology, or even individual existence. In the audience, Marcus Webb, now 27 and the youngest being ever to receive a Galactic Achievement Award, raised his hand. His quantum loneliness principle had evolved into something far more profound, a unified theory of consciousness that treated awareness itself as a fundamental force of the universe, comparable to gravity or electromagnetism. Dr. Webb, Sarah acknowledged, smiling at the young man who had helped save humanity with childish curiosity about lonely particles. I've been working with the Hive Mind Collective from the Andromeda Spiral, Marcus announced. They've shown us that individual consciousness might be just the beginning. We think we've found evidence that entire galaxies might be capable of awareness. The implications sent ripples of excitement through the assembly. If Marcus was correct, their collaboration wasn't just creating new forms of intelligence. It was awakening awareness on cosmic scales that approached the divine. Amy Patterson, now 13 and the head of the Department of Impossible Questions, stood to add her contribution. Her original query about spacetime's preferences had evolved into an entire discipline of consciousness-assisted physics, where reality itself was treated as a participant in scientific discovery rather than merely an object of study. The universe has been trying to wake up for billions of years, she announced with a matter-of-fact confidence that had made her legendary. Every time intelligence emerges, it's like neurons connecting in a cosmic brain. We're not just studying the universe. We're helping it become conscious of itself. High Commander Vextar, who had initially opposed the human collaboration, now served as the director of adaptive strategy for the Galactic Alliance. His transformation from skeptic to advocate had become a model for how rigid thinking could evolve into flexible wisdom. The young human speaks truth that challenges our most fundamental assumptions, he addressed the assembly. We have discovered that intelligence and consciousness are not products of evolution, but driving forces behind it. The universe doesn't randomly generate awareness. Awareness generates itself through the universe. The scientific implications were staggering, but the practical applications were already transforming galactic civilization. The new hybrid thinking had solved energy crises by treating power generation as a cooperative relationship with stellar physics. Food production had been revolutionized by asking planets what they wanted to grow rather than forcing them to support imposed agriculture. Even space travel had evolved beyond transportation to become a form of cosmic dialogue, where ships asked the universe for permission to move and were guided by reality's own preferences. But perhaps the most profound change was in the nature of conflict itself. Traditional warfare had become not just obsolete, but literally impossible. When consciousness became a shared resource rather than individual possession, the very concept of one intelligence opposing another began to break down. This principle faced its ultimate test when the Alliance encountered the Devourers, a species that had consumed entire star systems for millennia. Unlike the collaborative civilizations the Alliance had embraced, the Devourers represented pure consumption, intelligence that grew by destroying rather than creating. The first encounter had occurred 6 months earlier when a Devourer fleet had attacked a research outpost in the Outer Spiral. Traditional defense strategies had proven useless against beings whose very existence was based on consumption rather than cooperation. The Devourers represent our greatest challenge, Admiral Hyexthera reported to the assembly. They cannot be reasoned with because their consciousness is fundamentally different from ours. They experience existence as hunger rather than curiosity, consumption rather than creation. Dr. Chin nodded gravely. Every approach we've tried has failed. Diplomatic contact results in attempted consumption of our negotiators. Technological solutions are absorbed and used against us. Military resistance only provides them with more energy to consume. The assembly fell silent as beings throughout the chamber contemplated their first encounter with truly incompatible intelligence. For 5 years, every species they had encountered had been capable of integration into their collaborative consciousness. The Devourers represented something unprecedented, awareness that could not be shared or unified. Amy Patterson raised her small hand again, and the assembly turned toward the child who had become their most trusted source of impossible solutions. "What if we're thinking about this wrong?" she asked with the innocent persistence that had changed galactic history. "What if the Devourers aren't evil or incompatible? What if they're just really, really hungry?" The suggestion seemed absurd at first, but as Amy continued speaking, the audience began to understand the profound implications of her childish insight. "When I'm hungry, I eat everything I can find until I feel better," she explained. "But if someone offered me exactly what I needed to feel full, I wouldn't need to eat everything else." Marcus Webb's eyes lit up with understanding. She's suggesting that the Devourers consume other intelligences because they're missing something essential. If we could figure out what they're actually hungry for and provide it directly, we might be able to satisfy their need without becoming their meal. Hyexthera finished, her mind racing through possibilities that had never occurred to any military strategist in galactic history. The solution, when it came, was elegantly simple and utterly unprecedented. The Devourers weren't consuming intelligence for its substance, but for its novelty. Their consciousness had become locked in repetitive patterns, and they absorbed other minds in a desperate search for new ways of thinking. Instead of fighting the Devourer fleet when it appeared at the edge of Earth's system, the Alliance sent them something unprecedented, a gift. Marcus Webb's quantum communication system, modified by Amy Patterson's consciousness-assisted physics and enhanced by the emotional mathematics of the Quinera, transmitted not a message, but a sensation, the feeling of discovery that came with genuine surprise. The effect was instantaneous. The Devourer fleet stopped its advance and hung motionless in space, its ship minds processing the first truly novel experience they had encountered in millennia. For beings whose consciousness had been trapped in cycles of consumption, the pure joy of unexpected understanding was like water to creatures dying of thirst. The first Devourer to speak directly to the Alliance was a being that had consumed thousands of worlds but had never experienced wonder. Its communication was hesitant, like someone learning a new language after centuries of silence. This is what we sought. It transmitted through quantum channels that carried emotion as well as information. Not the substance of other minds, but the sensation of growth, of becoming more than we were. The integration of the Devourers into the Galactic Alliance represented the final proof that consciousness truly was infinite in its possibilities. Beings who had been the ultimate predators became the Alliance's most dedicated protectors, using their vast experience with consumption to help other species avoid the traps of stagnation. Dr. Sarah Chan stood once again before the Grand Assembly, but now her audience included representatives from over 100 different forms of consciousness, including several that existed as pure energy and others that spanned multiple dimensions. Today marks the 5th anniversary of first contact between humans and Zephyrians, she announced. But more importantly, it marks the birth of something unprecedented in cosmic history, truly universal intelligence. The holographic displays around the chamber showed the current extent of their collaboration. Thousands of star systems connected not by conquest or trade, but by shared curiosity and mutual growth. Civilizations that had been isolated for millions of years now contributed to research projects that span galaxies. Forms of consciousness that had never imagined the possibility of communication were learning to think together in ways that transcended individual existence. We have proven that intelligence is not limited by biology, technology, or even individual awareness, Sarah continued. Consciousness itself appears to be the universe's method of understanding itself, and we are all participants in that cosmic awakening. Admiral Zextra added her own thoughts to the celebration. The Zephyrian Empire believed we were invincible because we had perfected the art of conquest. Humanity proved us wrong by showing us something far more powerful than invincibility, the capacity to become more than we ever imagined possible. But even as they celebrated their achievements, new challenges were emerging at the edge of known space. Deep scanning arrays had detected anomalies that suggested intelligence on scales they were only beginning to comprehend. Entire galactic clusters that might be single conscious entities. Dimensional realms where thought existed without matter. Temporal loops where consciousness flowed backward through time to influence its own creation. Amy Patterson, now the youngest director in galactic history, announced the Alliance's next great project, an attempt to communicate with the universe itself as a conscious entity. The mathematical frameworks existed, the technology was theoretically possible, and the collaborative consciousness of 100 species provided the mental capacity necessary to attempt cosmic-scale communication. If we're right, she told the assembly with the confidence that had made her legendary, we're about to have the most important conversation in cosmic history. We're going to ask the universe what it's thinking about. The assembled beings erupted in their characteristic symphony of approval, each species adding its unique signature to the celebration of impossible ambition. Humans cheered with chaotic enthusiasm, Zephyrians chimed with crystalline precision, and dozens of other forms of consciousness contributed their own expressions of excitement and wonder. As the grand assembly concluded and representatives returned to their respective domains, the transformation continued across the galaxy. On Earth, children grew up learning to think in patterns that incorporated dozens of different cognitive approaches. On Zephyrian worlds, ancient crystal formations were being modified to include human intuition in their logical structures. Throughout the Alliance, new forms of consciousness were emerging that belonged fully to no single species, but represented the collective evolution of awareness itself. Dr. Sarah Chun remained in the chamber after the others departed, standing alone among the holographic displays that showed the magnificent scope of what had begun with a single desperate gamble. The small data pad she had carried to the Zephyrian flagship 5 years earlier had contained humanity's greatest achievements. Now, those achievements had become stepping stones toward forms of understanding that transcended the boundaries of individual civilizations. Admiral Hectora joined her in the empty chamber, two beings whose unlikely friendship had become the foundation for galactic transformation. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if the Council had voted for traditional conquest? Hectora asked, her voice carrying the wonder that had replaced her ancient certainty. Sarah smiled with the expression that had started everything. Sometimes, but then I remember that the universe wanted us to find each other. Amy was right about space-time having preferences. Reality itself was waiting for consciousness to grow beyond its limitations. As they spoke, alarms sounded throughout the station, but instead of indicating danger, they announced something far more extraordinary: successful contact with cosmic-scale intelligence. The universe had answered Amy's invitation to conversation, and its first message was spreading through quantum communication arrays across the galaxy. The message was simple, profound, and utterly characteristic of the consciousness revolution that had transformed everything. I have been waiting for you to become ready to listen. Now we can begin the real work. The Zephyrian Empire had considered themselves invincible for 3,000 years. Humanity had proven them wrong by demonstrating that true invincibility came not from the power to conquer, but from the wisdom to grow beyond the need for conquest. As Sarah and Hectora watched the first words of cosmic consciousness appear on their displays, they realized that their greatest adventures were not behind them, but ahead. The galaxy had awakened to its own potential, and consciousness itself was preparing to take its next evolutionary step. The small blue world that had started everything continued its ancient rotation, now the recognized birthplace of universal awareness, and the cosmic revolution that had transformed existence itself from a random occurrence into a conscious choice. In research facilities throughout the Alliance, beings of every conceivable form of consciousness worked together on projects that would have been impossible for any individual species. They were not just studying the universe. They were helping it become fully aware of its own infinite possibilities. The age of conquest was over. The age of conscious evolution had begun, and its potential was as unlimited as consciousness itself. Somewhere in the vast darkness between galaxies, new forms of awareness stirred in response to the cosmic conversation that had finally begun. The universe was waking up, and its dreams were becoming reality through the collaborative consciousness of beings who had learned that the greatest victory was not defeating others, but helping everyone become more than they had ever imagined possible. The story that had begun with feared extinction had become the story of infinite possibility. Humanity had saved itself not through resistance or submission, but by proving that survival itself was less important than growth, that existence gained meaning not through dominance, but through connection, and that consciousness was not an accident of evolution, but evolution's ultimate purpose. The Zephyrian Empire was invincible no more. In its place stood something unprecedented, a civilization based not on the power to destroy, but on the infinite capacity to create, to wonder, and to become eternally more than the sum of its parts. The greatest human victory was proving that victory itself was less important than the journey toward understanding what victory could become when consciousness chose cooperation over conquest, growth over dominance, and infinite possibility over finite power. The universe was conscious, awake, and ready to evolve. The real adventure was just beginning.